began and the short-lived dynasty entered an early twilight. Republicans lost the House to Democrats, but they did hold on to the Senate, and they actually gained seats there. However, in 2020, when Biden won the White House, Democrats kept control of the House, and they gained control of the Senate, pulling off a government trifecta. This was the first time for Democrats since 2008. And then in 2022, Republicans were betting on a huge so-called red wave. Remember that? Well, it never actually materialized. It was more like a red sprinkle, maybe. Although Republicans narrowly took back the House, they failed to win control of the Senate in large part because the Trump-endorsed candidates in the key states like Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, well, they lost. And now in 2024, the GOP is in for another election year with Trump at the head of the party. So what does that mean for Republicans who are down ballot in the races that have to actually get won besides the presidency? And what does that mean for the party as a whole? Joining me now is Rina Shah, Republican political strategist, former congressional aide, and principal founder of Relax Strategies, as well as former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania. Thank you to you both. Congressman Dent, I want to start with you because I like your name. You have these races in districts where Donald Trump and his politics are in many ways not in alignment with what the district represents, either purple districts or purple states, where it pays to be more of a moderate Republican and almost cast yourself as an independent. Can you talk about the sort of conflict that it creates for a down ballot candidate in a district like that who now has to align themselves with the head of the party in Donald Trump, whose politics are far more extreme than theirs?
Well, Charles, you essentially described my old congressional district in eastern Pennsylvania, the Lehigh Valley region. That's exactly the dynamic that I faced, and it's one of the reasons why Republicans aren't winning many of these key swing districts. You pointed out that, since 2016, Donald Trump has made losing great again for Republicans. For this very reason, his brand of politics turns off a lot of swing voters and independents. There are some Republicans still who represent districts that Joe Biden won, about 17 or so districts. And Donald Trump makes victory exceedingly difficult for them in those districts, as well as in swing states. And until Republicans figure this out, that Donald Trump is creating problems for them, not only with independents, but I would argue with a significant amount of the Republican base. Yes, Donald Trump controls the party. He has over half the voters. But it depends which polls you look at, but maybe as many as a third of Republicans who aren't going to vote for Donald Trump this time. This is catastrophic for not only the presidential race for the GOP, but also for many down ballot races. So your analysis is right on. And I just have to say, I have to object to your Dallas Cowboys and Raiders analogy as a guy who bleeds Philadelphia Eagles green. Thank you.
EAGLES Eagles. We can talk about that another day. Rina, I want to talk to you. One of my mom's favorite songs is by Timbaland and Chic, and it's Ride or Die Chick. And I want to understand, why is the GOP such ride or die for Donald Trump? Explain this to me. In terms of MAGA ideology, it has not been fruitful or productive, but no candidate has been able to hold a candle to taking him off of this throne. So where does this ride or die, until the casket drops mentality comes from with respect to the right and their allegiance to 45?
Well, I think we saw some of that come on display this past week with the RNC trying to make Trump the presumptive nominee. And then, of course, cooler heads prevailed and said, well, we shouldn't do this. And then Trump's, of course, advisors got in there and said, well, you shouldn't do this. So believe me when I say that was not really Trump talking last week. It was his advisor. It looks really bad if you try to stack it for yourself right now. Look, I think one of the greatest frustrations for me, Charles, right now, over the past 7 to 8 years in particular, is really the fact that there's been a lack of acknowledgement of one of the greatest issues that has propelled Trump forward and continues to make him so beloved in the party. And that's the fact that there have been trusted messengers who take this message forward. So like I said, just last week, we saw that on display. There is, again, a lack of acknowledgement about how organized the American right is. And I'll just share a really quick personal vignette to display that. I mean, I just saw it just 2 weeks ago. I was on my way up to New York, and I was passing through Union Station in D.C., and it was on a Friday, and I saw hordes of high school students in town in Washington, D.C., that were clearly not from Washington, D.C., from rural states, because I was reading the names of their high schools, what was on their sweatshirts. They were in town for the March for Life rally. Now, we all know what that's been over all these years, but Roe has been overturned. Y'all got your way. It's been kicked back to the state. These kids were brought to town. I came back to Union Station the very next day, right after the March for Life rally was over, and I saw these high school boys, again, passing through Union Station with bucket hats that were printed, "Let's go, Brandon." I mean, this is what we're up against. When you talk about how the right has gotten so organized, it's been over, I wouldn't say decades, but I can definitely trace back to when I was 18. These chapters have come up, and they're getting to the youngest members of the party. And so I don't want to simplify this and be reductive and say it's a cult, but when you ingratiate young people with this mentality that there's a whole apparatus against them, this is what you're going to get.
Congressman, Rena made the point that in the Republican Party, part of what is keeping the allegiance to Donald Trump alive is this notion of credible messengers. I want to ask you, is this really a matter of true allegiance and belief in MAGA ideology, or is it really fear-based in the sense that, look, this guy seems to be unshakable and unflappable as the head of the party. If I get out of line with him, even as I may not believe what he says, I could face consequences, and therefore I'm going to be in lockstep? Or do they just really believe the rhetoric?
Well, I think what's so unusual about Donald Trump is that he has tapped into a vein that we've seen in this country for a very long time. There's a nativist element, isolationist, protectionist element, populist element. And I think, over the years, leaders of both parties have tended not to try to stoke that beast, so to speak. And Trump has, of course, stoked it, and so he's found it, and he has a very strong, dedicated following based on fear, grievance, anger, nativism, et cetera. It does not represent, though, I think, a majority of the country by any means, or even maybe it's half of the Republican Party, maybe. And so I think Donald Trump has created for himself a very low ceiling. And he can't break through it because of who he is and what he represents and the types of politics that he forces upon the American people. I think that is an enormous problem for the party. And I've said for some time the party has to become much more serious about winning. And you cannot win in these critical swing states and swing districts with those messages. Sure, he'll be able to win in these ruby red areas and be very strong and have a strong minority perhaps in the Congress. But in order to get majorities, they have to be able to expand the base. And they are not expanding to other constituencies. And as has been pointed out, the abortion issue also is sitting out there as a major liability for the party. They're on the wrong side of public opinion, and they have to fix that issue, too. They have to moderate their position. And I don't know if they're capable of doing it, but it's Trump's brand of politics, though, that is resonant. But, up until now, we haven't had Republican presidents or nominees for the presidency who stoked that. They never got through the Pat Buchanans of the world, people like that. But this is where we are now. Trump broke through, and that's why we're dealing with these consequences.
Republican strategist Rena Shah of Relax Strategies, always a pleasure to talk to you, and former